Okay, starting again. Hi, anybody that's with me this morning. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Jyoti Manuel, and I'm the founder of Special Yoga. I've been working with for many years now. And I'm really aware that in this time of isolation, that there's a lot of families there with children with autism, and there's also kids in education who are still in education with autism as well, who are struggling because schedules are, I've lost track of time. So I just thought it would be, I thought it would be nice to share a few different practices that might be helpful for these beautiful children. So first of all, I just want to say that, every child is unique, and whether they have a label of autism or irrespective of whatever label they have, I've actually never met two children with autism the same. So our policy and our kind of, way of working is really to meet the child rather than the condition. And we also know that no label changes the child. Each one of these amazing kids is an amazing kid. And so, our focus really starts from there anyway. And I really believe also that there is a key to access every child, and it's not going to be the same for every child. Also, the autistic spectrum is huge, and, you have children who are, ambulatory, although they will all be ambulatory in this population actually, but who are verbal. You have children who are non-verbal. You've got such an enormous spectrum of within the autistic population, from Asperger's, PDA, pre-verbal, non-verbal, verbal, etc., etc. So not all of these practices will work for all the children. So I thought if I just shared a few different practices over the course of the little time I'm with you this morning, hopefully there'll be something that you will be able to use for the children in your care. I'm assuming that that's why you've come on this morning. So I want to just also say that, yoga is an amazing sensory diet, actually, for these children as well. A lot of these children will be experiencing challenges in their sensory systems. And, we can use yoga very effectively as a way of giving the system the proprioceptive and vestibular feedback that a lot of these children are looking for in the way in which they move, in the way in which they function in the world. And observing these kids really is amazing, because what they do is they tell you what they need in terms of how they move, the way they move, how they move their bodies, the sounds they make, etc., will give you feedback will give you information as to what their systems are looking for. And oftentimes, although they get stuck in patterns, as we know, there'll be a lot of information that we can read there when we can be quiet enough to get out our own way to observe and to be there with them. So our intention at Special Yoga is really to bring all of these children into the greatest place of inner peace, because I truly believe that when our systems are relaxed, when our nervous system is calm, that's when we can really function from optimum. And I think most of these children, in fact, all of these children, are totally brilliant, actually. And it's really allowing for that amazingness and that brilliance to arise in its natural state, when the sensory system is calm and everything is calm. So we don't have any expectations when we practice yoga with these children. We just, go with the flow, see what's possible, see what happens, really. But with a heartfelt, intentional prayer to bring peace to them. And obviously, I have to be peaceful if I'm going to bring peace to anybody, because if I'm anxious, then I'm pretty much useless to anyone. So within the field of yoga, as a field of yoga, we use movement. Now, some children will need vigorous movement in order to help to still their nervous systems. So we would be looking at kind of active sun salutation. We would, meet them in that kind of standing activity, and then work to take them down to the mat with practices that will help to balance the right and left hemispheres of the brain. So I particularly like two things from lying on the mat. One is for these children, and I found both to be effective, across quite a wide spectrum of this population. One is to really stretch the body. So you lay down on the mat, your arms are over your head, your toes are as far away as you can, and you're literally stretching the body as much as you can with your fingers and your toes away from each other as possible. And then as you breathe into that and you stretch all of that, you then close the body up by bringing the knees in towards the chest, and you squeeze yourself in. So it would look, oops, I've actually got a yoga mat here. It would look like this. So we're going to stretch from here, and then we close the body here, and we repeat that movement. And I think that it's really important to help these children to be more embodied. So when we bring the upper body and the lower body together, we're connecting ourselves to ourselves. One of the big issues, I think, for a lot of the children on the autistic spectrum is that actually they're not really embodied, they're not really present in their bodies. And when we bring the body together, we bring the pieces of the body together and we start to touch it, you can do that from here, you can squeeze your legs, you can really squeeze down your legs, you can even squeeze your feet if you can reach them. Then you start to have the sensation of actually being in the body. And that stretch and closing, the stretching helps to fire up all the muscles and tendons and ligaments to create more serotonin in the system. And then you close it down. And I would repeat that several times, actually. We tend to do that one quite often. And then the other movement that I think beyond sun salutation, things like that, that's really helpful is spinal twists. And I particularly like spinal twists laying on the ground. So spinal twist laying on the ground, for anybody that's perhaps not so familiar, would be this movement here. I think you can see me on the camera, where you take your knees to one side, your head to the other, come up, and then you go the other way. And what I've noticed in working with children with on the spectrum is when their state is quite disorganized, it's quite difficult for them to go oftentimes to one side. So I would really I would be holding their knees perhaps if they need support with it, and just rocking them from side to side. There's also something very, very, very soothing about that gentle rocking movement through the pelvis. And I think that, if you look at the energetic chakra system, what you'll find with these kids is that the lower chakras, which in a very basic way would signify that sensation of being at home in your being, are disconnected. So that particular movement is really good for undoing that. It's also very good for stimulating the digestive system, the elimination system, which is generally, not always, but often compromised in children with autism or children on that spectrum. So we're doing a number of different things by rotating the lower body. And there is something about being able to undo that bit that allows us to come home and be at peace. And as I said, if you go from side to side, oftentimes I've noticed that the children are more blocked from one side to the other. And the more that you repeat that movement, the more all of a sudden what will happen is the blockage will unblock. And I'm talking about an energetic blockage. I'm not talking about a physical blockage. And then there's a kind of a sense of the child going, okay, all right, now I can come in and be here in a deeper way. So I found that to be super useful as a position. I think other physical asana practices that are asana movements that are useful for these children are the prone positions where we do back bends. So we could do a cobra, which would look like this. I actually would, oops, you can't see me there. Let's see if I can move the camera. There we go. So I would do it with my elbows down to start with, because I can come up more evenly here. if I come up here, if I'm going to come up with my hands down, I want to make sure that the child is using both hands at the same time to come up. And so they're not coming up like this and twisting their body, taking them out of alignment. The other position that I think is useful for these children, which stimulates both the chakra system and also stimulates the gut, is your bow pose. So, and then we can come back down once we've done back bends into child's pose. So child's pose being here. And I think sequencing for this population is really important because, well, I think sequencing is important anyway, but, you know, when we open the body, we want to close it again as well. So you have that balance between very open and exposed to also just closing in. And I think that there's something really useful about keeping the body connected to itself. So anytime we open the body, we would then follow that by allowing it to be closed down again. So obviously breath matters in the perspective of yoga. And what you'll find is that actually I don't think anybody in the world really breathes well anyway. But particularly in these populations, and particularly when you're in high levels of anxiety, fear, fright, and flight, you know, in that kind of red alert state, breath is always compromised. And so there are different pathways to helping a child to breathe. So it might be that we can use an entrainment, which means that I breathe deeply. So what I'm doing is inviting you to breathe deeply. I tend to use Ujjayi breath myself, so you can hear my breath. Sometimes the child goes, no breathing, no breathing, in which case you stop the sound because they're obviously experiencing sound sensitivity. And you just be quiet with your breath. Other times the sound of the breath can be really useful and really calming for a child near them, next to them. And then your breath becomes a form of communication with the child that's basically in an unspoken way saying, my invitation to you is to calm, my invitation to you is to breathe. Sometimes we can use touch-supported breathing, whereby I would put my hands on the child's belly, or I might put one hand on my belly, one hand on their belly, and just see if we can, you know, create that kind of, again, it's like a form of communication of how we build, how we connect with those children to help them to breathe better. Not all children will tolerate touch, so it may be that you can't touch the children, but that's where entrainment works. And then there are certain pressure points in the hands and the feet that I think are super useful for breath as well. So in the center of the hand, you have a point here, which is, if in hand reflexology, I'm not a reflexologist, but I know a little bit. Here is your diaphragm. So just for some children, they'll push you away, and for some children, they'll go, ah. And the other points on the hands that I think are useful for calming would be in the wrist here, you have a bone, and it's almost like inside the bone. You kind of go in and under. There's a point there that I think is super helpful. And then you've got another one, which is if you bend the wrist here and you put 3 fingers, and then just above that, or just below that on the way I'm doing it at the moment, is the point where you would, if you were using a motion sickness band, that would be where you would do it. This is actually a really good point for reflux as well, which some of these children will experience. It's also a calming point. So you can do it whether you're holding both sides of the wrist on top and below, and try that. And then you can also potentially work down through the fingers. So each of the fingers, if you looked at it from the meridian, the Chinese energetic system, have, the meridian lines all go down through the fingers as extremities. So we tend to use a movement that works through each side of the joints. So we're not on the joint, we're massaging between the joints, and massaging between the joints. And I noticed that, and you do it on all the fingers, obviously. And I noticed that some children really like this. I mean, if they like it, they really like it. And then they'll keep giving you their hands to keep doing more. And, you know, you could also for some children, get them to do it to themselves. But I also noticed that some children like one finger more than others. So you just stay with what's going to soothe them and calm them, because again, that's their body telling you what they need and what's going to help them in this moment. So, you know, if you just try it with yourself for a moment, just see what that feels like. This is something I particularly like, actually. I find myself doing it sometimes during the day without even realizing I'm doing it. So I think these are really helpful. And I think also there's a suggestion also that you could pinch the ends of the fingers also as you do it. So we also use sound. Actually, I'm just going to do one more pressure point. So on the feet, which obviously not all children will let you get into, you have what they call, my feet are a little bit dirty, actually, not too bad. Underneath the pad of the foot, in the center of the foot here, this is also the foot equivalent of the center of your hand. So this is called the bubbling spring in Chinese medicine. And again, we found that when you, sometimes if this is a pathway, a useful pathway for any individual child, when it works, the child will suddenly go, and it's almost like all the tension in their diaphragm and around the solar plexus, but the diaphragm just relaxes. And as it relaxes, of course, then they can take a beautiful, nice deep breath. And you go, so you just stay there, So those are a small suggestions of different pressure points that we use quite regularly with the children. There's also some on the hands and the head. So if you were to go up from your ears and you bring your palms of your hands here, and you literally squeeze into your head. So what you're doing here is you're bringing the right and left hemispheres of the brain together. So you just squeeze really tightly and let go. And then you can squeeze really tightly and let go. And then sometimes what we do is tap that into the body, tap the balance that you've just done into the body. So I'm just going to invite you to try that for yourself right now, is just bring your hands onto your head and just squeeze. It's almost like squeezing your head together, actually. Just squeeze, 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 and release. And just see if it has any impact on you. And release. And then the other place I think on the face that can be quite useful for these children is around the temples. Is just, you know, sometimes if you've got a headache, or certainly for me, if I've been on the computer too much, I find myself just doing this, and it's again a very calming point. And again, the children can do this to themselves as well. And then you're going to get children on the spectrum who actually like to have pressure down through the top of their head. So you can just squeeze down. And again, I just invite you, I don't think we should do anything to the children, by the way, that we don't understand in our own bodies. So I think it's really helpful to just put your hands on top of your head for a moment and just put some pressure down through the middle of the head. And just notice what that feels like. Can you relax your shoulders while you do it? You'll tend to find that a lot of the children on the spectrum will have very tight necks, very tight shoulders. And again, we can work into that. I'm going to tie my hair up and show you a couple of points in the back of the head that I think are useful if the children will let you in. So I'm just going to point my back to the camera for a moment to show you. So if you work where your skull comes in, there's a soft spot underneath the skull. So if you follow it from behind the ear, you'll find that there are some points there, and if you can see, where actually they're quite tender in me, but I think that they're really helpful for releasing the tension in the base of the skull and the base of the neck. And again, let's just see where they are in you. So just see if you can find them for you. And what happens if you just press them and then let them go? And then press them again. And let them go. And then again, just press it again. And you could also go around into your, into the back of the neck. So again, I'm going to just move my hair out of the way. And you can just go down. So you're not going down on the spine, on the cervical spine. You're just going down the sides of the cervical spine and down into the shoulders, and just see whether you could help those children to release. You'll find that they are really, generally, most kids on the spectrum that I've worked with are really, really tight in the neck and the shoulders. And of course, that's where we hold so much of our tension. So if we can just release that, it also helps to relax, and then the shoulders can move down your back and everything just can calm down a bit. So I'm wondering how you feel actually with your, just having worked a bit of your head. I feel much lighter for me. So I find that really actually quite helpful. In the last video I did a week or so ago, when I was giving some tools for parents, I shared some tapping practices and some shaking practices that I learned from Dr. Brown and Dr. Gerbag from the Breath, Body, Mind Institute. And I found both of those practices also to be really, really, really helpful for these kids as well. And sometimes we tap the child's body because they can't tap themselves. And sometimes they can tap their own body. So again, finding a dance with that according to their abilities. Touch becomes also quite important. So we have children on the spectrum who are very touch sensitive, and you can't get near those. I'm not going. This is not going to be a useful practice for those kids. But I think for a lot of the others, squeezing through the body is really helpful. So and you can do this with me actually. Let's just start by squeezing your shoulder really tightly, and then squeeze down your arm, all the way down your arm. And it's almost like you could say hello to your body as you do it. And I would work right the way down the hands, right the way down into the fingers, right the way down. And then just take a moment to notice the quality of the sensation in that arm as opposed to the other one. For me, it feels much more alive. It feels much more like I'm really here. And the idea with this is that I'm in my body. I'm actually in my body. So I could squeeze down through this arm as well, squeezing down through the hand. And so often I've been in schools where they use these sensory practices and the kid will come up to you and give you their arm. Well, if they can give you their arm, they can do it themselves, is my theory. And actually, we want these children to be self-sufficient and be able to do these things on their own. So I would take a hand and their hand, put my hand over their hand and show them how to do it to themselves. Because really what we want these kids to become is independent of us and not need somebody to give them that feedback. And of course, there's something also just about squeezing yourself again and giving yourself just that big hug. And here we can tap and we can tap ourselves. And again, try it with me, because you need to experience what this feels like as you tap down through the body. And then also you can do the same thing through the legs. I'm just going to see if I can get the camera in the right place to show you. So we're going to just again squeeze down through our legs, so squeezing all the way down. And again, if you can reach your feet, just squeeze your toes. You can squeeze each individual toe. You can squeeze through the feet, and then just squeeze down through the body. Just squeezing, and just give it a rub so that you really start to stimulate the body. And the practice of doing that, I think, is also really helpful because what it does again is it's an invitation to be back in your body. So I'm back in my body. I can feel my body. My body actually feels more alive now. So I hope that that's you're also having that same experience. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the core. What I also notice is that a lot of these children don't have a whole lot of core strength. And I'm going to go back to a couple of asanas now, because I just noticed from my notes that I'd skipped that bit when I was talking about asanas earlier, because I was more talking about connectivity. But we also need to build these kids' strength. So obviously sun salutation works, but the way in which we move really matters. So if I were to just be doing a very simple pose, for example, let's see if I can get the camera working here again. There we go. So if I were to be doing a really simple pose where I lift one leg and then I bring my knee into my chest and I stay here, what I don't want to do is go like that, because I've got no connection to my core. Whereas if I lift my leg here, I'm having to hold my core, and then I can bring my knee into my chest, and then I could bring my head up to my knee, which again requires my core. My head goes back down, I shoot my leg out, I come back down. So any of the journeys into the pose, we can do the same thing with the other leg as well. Here we go. And head up, and then out and down. And generally you would start to work on your right side as well, because you've got your ascending colon on the right and your descending colon on the left. So you want to stimulate the right side first and then the left side. So we're coming towards time for questions, but I hope that these have been useful. So when we work with special yoga, we work with a limited amount of postures. We keep them relatively simple, but I really think that using them well is helpful, so that we really get the best benefit out of anything that we're doing. It doesn't matter whether it's a breathing practice or an asana practice or anything else. It's really offering, offering the most usefulness there. So, the journey to the pose and the journey out of the pose is as useful often as the pose itself. So just starting to work with that, working slowly, getting the children to do it well, because obviously they'll skip out those bits if they can, because it's easier. And, just finding your way. So I hope this has been helpful. I'm going to open now for any questions. If you want to learn more about our work, we have an online site now called specialyoga.thinkific, like thinking, IFIC at the end of it, .com. And we are constantly building more online resources for that. So not sure whether there's anybody asking anything. What was that? So I don't know if there's any questions that I could answer from any of you. No open questions at the moment. Okay, should we give it a minute to see whether anybody wants to ask anything? Or whether I can help you. Yes, Heather.
They're in the chat. The questions are in the chat.
Okay, I'm going to find them. Okay. Chat. Helpful to be. Do I use full body tapping with the children? Sometimes, yes. Actually, I think that the tapping's really interesting, because what I think it does. Yes, I will repeat my website as well. What I think it does is it opens all the energetic channels. So what I also notice is that certain children have different responses to different aspects of the tapping. So what I'm always doing is listening to them and really trying to follow how they work, how they, what information are they giving me without the blah, 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 blah. But yeah, I mean, there's no reason why not to use the full body tapping if that child is responsive to it. Lovely, you teach adults, and so Sharon says, I teach adults and children with autism in Mid-Sussex. I'm going to type my website here so that you've got it. Someone else has asked me how oh, good. I'm glad that, Karen, that might help you. So how did I start this work? So I started yoga myself in 1974, and I'd had a very, very, very difficult childhood and was fairly traumatized. And for me, it was a pathway to my own healing. And then when I came to teach, I didn't really have a plan to teach kids with special needs, but people with special needs were arriving in my adults classes within the second or third class. And then a head teacher asked me to go into a school in central London. I mean, this is like late 70s. And, you know, in those days, yoga wasn't popular. And also the children weren't diagnosed in those days. So I saw all these kids, you know, in a mainstream deprived, you know, in a very deprived area of London, you know, kind of really out their bodies, you know, chewing and fiddling, and the same as I had experienced in myself. And I know what it's like to not want to live in my body, because that's how I spent my early childhood anyway. And so I just kind of learned how to play around and adapt and work with that. And then a few years later, I was introduced to the work of Sonia Sumar from Yoga for the Special Child. And I both studied with her, and I also taught her work for 12 years in the UK. And I think it was 12 years, 10 years, whatever it was. And then she and I parted ways, and we kind of developed our own way of working. But so I've just worked with these kids for a long time, and it was the path that almost like I was divinely guided to do. And I travel around the world, and I work with in many different countries with lots of children. And, you know, for me, at some level, they're all the same as me anyway, because we've all got special needs. And if we kind of see beyond the surface of their special needs and just meet their hearts and meet their souls and really learn to quieten ourselves so that we can truly listen, I'm not listening through our ears, but listen through our eyes, listen through our own energy field. You know, when you connect heart to heart and soul to soul, you're just there with the child, and they're telling you that they're communicating with you all the time. And of course, 80% of communication is nonverbal anyway. So I think that we can learn a lot. And these children teach me constantly, absolutely constantly. So there's another question here saying, oh, there's something on Q&A as well. Can I suggest standing postures? Well, okay, can I talk about how to engage children who can't copy movements? Okay. So the website, I'm going to repeat again because people are asking me for it, is www.specialyogathinkific.com. So other standing postures that are fun. Sometimes when we work with these children, I have to say we don't take them up to standing, because the ground is a really important, you know, for children that really don't know where they are in space. I think that, I'm just going to take this down. I think that the earth gives you the feedback of where you are in space. So oftentimes if you take the kids up to standing, they're off and out again. It's like they've gone, bing, 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 bing. So I'm of the view that what we want to do is to help these kids really get grounded, get earthed before we bring them up, so that when they come up, they can usefully use the ground. Because of course, when you're standing, you've only got your feet on the ground, which is the furthest apart away from your head. And you'll see that a lot of these children are toe walking. So, you know, if they're up on their toes, their feet aren't on the ground. And therefore, from the perspective of the way I see these kids, is they're the ones that need to be sitting down and laying down, not up doing standing postures. But if we are doing standing postures, I think that you could do tree pose. But what I would do wouldn't be to do tree pose where you've got, I'm going to just show you for a minute, where you've got your foot up here. Oops, I don't know whether you can see me. Foot up here necessarily. I think what you want to do is I'm just going to show you my feet for a minute. You want to have your foot here, because, you know, for children who can't balance, that is a balance. You might want to do aeroplane. Perhaps I'm just going to, you know, where you take the leg back, because this requires concentration and also balance through the system, which I think is helpful. And, you can play with it as well. Where are we going today? If you want to go into that place. I tend to be quite non-verbal during a lot of the sessions with the kids with autism, because I think that for children who are more like single channel processors or who are in sensory overload, trying to get them to watch you, listen to you, and feel anything simultaneously is impossible, and then you lose them. So I tend to use quite often quite little language, if anything, and if I do, I keep it really super simple, because what I want them to do is to really feel and watch, rather than having to listen as well, because it's too confusing for their nervous systems and their sensory systems. And if we want to calm them down, then what we want to do is to give them the possibility of being able to process the information you're asking them to do. So I don't know if there's any more questions. I'm going to put so can I talk about how to engage children who can't copy movements and who might not be engaged? So with the children who can't copy movements, I would support them to do the movements, actually, because we often assist with the children that aren't able to copy. And what I would tend to do would be to help them, but I would repeat the moves. So doing a move one time isn't going to help them to be able to embody it, feel it in their body systems. Whereas if I repeat the same movement 3, 4, 5 times, then actually what's happening is their whole system is able to understand it and to be able to fully engage with it. So I would assist for the children that can't copy, because there's no point in them having them looking at you and they're not doing anything. But actually, interestingly, sometimes they're doing it inside their minds before they're doing it in person. So I've noticed that sometimes the children are behind me or seemingly behind me, and yet they seem to know exactly what you're doing. And I think sometimes you can, if you really are connected with the child, you'll see that sometimes what's happening is they're watching you do something, and you need to keep it really simple with those kids. And they're trying to figure out what it is that you're doing. And it's almost like they're doing it inside their brains, and then you repeat it, and perhaps you prompt them. So, because sometimes these kids don't know what part of their body you're asking them to move, even though they're watching you, because they're so disembodied that they've disassociated from their bodies. So prompting can help. Sometimes supporting them to move can help. So I think it's just different for different kids, but not all children are going to copy you. But watch them, because sometimes they can copy and they're choosing not to. Sometimes they can't because they get stuck. Sometimes they haven't got that neurological processing. Those pathways aren't open yet. So, I think it's just, I think one of our roles in assisting these kids anyway is to really learn how to deeply, deeply, deeply listen beyond talking. So, because there's so much they can tell us, and if we really get that, you're 80% nonverbal, it's amazing what they tell you when they start to move. So I don't know, Sarah, if that answers your question about how to engage children who can't copy movements. And if they're not engaged, it's really, for me, it's about finding what is going to engage them. So it might be, there is a key to every child. And I'm also aware that children with autism and children who are deeply traumatized, in other words, the children that are the most disembodied, if you like, are probably the most difficult to work with, because we have to work harder to find the pathway in. And there is a pathway in to every child. We just have to find it. So building your toolbox, exploring different pathways to access. So it might be through sound, which we didn't touch on today. It might be through touch. It might be through breath. It might be through movement. I don't know. It's every child will present you with something different to work with. And I think if we can just stay calm and go, okay, so the more we watch them, the more they're going to tell us what they want anyway. So for example, if you've got a child that's stimming and tapping on the wall, listen to the rhythm. So if you repeat then the rhythm on the mat, they'll suddenly turn around and go, you've connected, because what you've done is you've met them. So sometimes if you've got a jumping kid, I might go and jump with them, and then I can bring, it's almost like you go into their world and then bring them into yours. So I'm not sure whether that's how helpful that is, but that tends to be how I work. And I really think that it's it's up for us really to listen and be present. And I think that's the biggest gift we can give anybody anyway, is our full presence, without expectation and without trying to do anything. I used to think, oh my God, if I could only get these kids on the mat. No kid's going to come on the mat with that attitude anyway. You just need to make it super calm and super invitational. And generally, if you just sit quietly and peacefully, they'll probably join you anyway, because you make them want to. If you're like, I want to get that car on the mat, I wouldn't want to get on a mat with somebody that's in that state. So why would they? I think that's, I think we have to kind of see what would work for us too. What would be the most invitational? What would draw you? Where's the peace? And, and that's what we want to emanate. And that's what we want to bring to help these children. Your state matters more than anything, actually. And that's how we can start to really work with them. So there might be time for one more question. Otherwise, I'm going to love you and leave you this morning, and hope that this has been helpful for you. And and I mean, if there's anything we can help you with, please do come on to our site and come and join our community. So thank you very much. Namaste. Have a beautiful day. And the more peaceful you are, the more peaceful your children will be as well. And I certainly know that as a parent. So thank you all very, very much. And please, and also just before I leave, just please share this with any parents that could be, used. I'm so aware of how hard it is for parents to be locked away in their homes right now with these children. And so if any of this would be helpful to anybody, please, please, please share it. Thank you. And it's on HealthFlix YouTube. So thank you. Namaste, and thank you all very much.